what is biodiversity credit? So it's a tool to quantify, track, and reward nature-positive biodiversity conservation efforts and outcomes. And we'll get into some of these different dimensions. But there have also been other terms to express more or less the same thing: nature credits, biodiversity certificates, etc. But I think biodiversity credits is now what is the dominating term. And this new tool has been drawing quite a lot on two relatives in the family, namely the voluntary carbon markets and the credits generated there, and biodiversity offsets. But we can also say there can be a lot of actions on the ground that underlie this generation of biodiversity credits. So it is like a marketing umbrella for many heterogeneous type of actions. Of great interest is, of course, how do you delimit this credits from offsets which have been around for decades, biodiversity offsets. And this is also something we as an author group have been going a bit forth and back on. In the biodiversity offsets would also have be directly related to the investors' business as usual impact on biodiversity. And in many cases, it would be a mandatory action through regulation that you are required to offset your impacts. And in these three aspects, the biodiversity credits would be different. They would be voluntary, no net loss, and no direct relation to the BIU impacts. But still, they both draw on the same type of supply of projects. So the actions that that different proponents are doing to sell the good thing they're doing for biodiversity. We have also seen that empirically in our assessment of initiatives. There are various of them that are selling both to buyers that want credits, who do not want to offset anything, but others do come with an offsetting purpose in mind. And that, of course, creates a segmentation of the market. And there should be a distinction, but there will also be some forces of fungibility between the two. So if I'm a company and I want to buy biodiversity credits to use it for the purposes of reputational benefits, to better sell my product, etc. I could still sort of indirectly offset some impacts. For instance, that I can't offset through biodiversity offsets. We say, okay, I have some residual impacts, but now I'm doing this instead, right? So there could be a danger in that sense that if these biodiversity credits, these voluntary actions, are being used to penetrate the offset market, which are strongly regulated and where you have some strong principles, for instance, the like-for-like type of offsets, then I could be producing offsets on the cheap. So I decide to do something good for biodiversity, and I'm using that in a reputational manner as a PR benefit, but in fact, I'm not really offsetting to the standards that I'm legally bound to. So why are we seeing this move towards biodiversity credits now? We do have other tools to help finance biodiversity, and that can be PES type of payments for environmental services type of arrangement, integrated conservation development projects with a biodiversity focus, biodiversity certification. We do have gold standard RED Plus of avoided deforestation. That's also biodiversity friendly. We have ecotourism, a number of tools. I think the urgency is obviously because we're realizing that these things are not generating enough resources on the one hand. And I think the new thing also is kind of the deliberate commodification of nature and of biodiversity that is in there. And that is, many people will use the term commodification as a bad thing. You're saying about because nature should not be traded, but that is actually what we're trying to do here in the sense of that you can create a clear attribution to an owner of the credits. You can trade these credits across actors in a market. You have a divisibility, so you can maybe buy a certain share of an action to the extent that to fulfill your demands. And you could also store these credits over time. So as so often with markets, they have some promises, and markets are good at when they work well at allocating resources efficiently and creating new financial resources. But on the other hand, there can be a peril of creating a new tool for gaming certain actions in a greenwashing sense, and I'll come back to that later on. So in Europe, we are seeing that biodiversity credits are getting quite some attention. At the same time, there is also an awareness that some of these commercial tools might be distracting attention. So basically all that I'm talking about here is comes from a paper of ours. We're quite a big author group with different expertise that have come together to do this sort of stock taking on biodiversity credits, where our focus is, how does this relate to the experiences we've had with other market-based tools, like as I said, carbon credits and biodiversity offsets. This is still under review. I think we are in the last stages now, but underlying it is also a database that we've gathered through a survey and interviews of and revision of literature and gray literature, where we are classifying 37 of these emerging schemes. And we can also map them globally according to whether they are already fully operational or partially so in the pilot stage, or are in preparation still. What we can see is they are particularly popular in some of the Anglophone countries that traditionally have been favoring market-based tool quite a lot, but also other places like Colombia, for instance, quite a number of initiatives there. But otherwise, Australia, the UK, etc., are leading. And we also produced a policy brief with some recommendations for the Circular Bioeconomy Alliance. So at the analytical level, I think we try to think about biodiversity credits in the framework of a theory of change. So a theory of change where you link different inputs, like here you have some investors, you have some standard developers that come together, and a project developer is designing some treatments on the ground. And these can, as I said, this can be many different things. It could be a small protected area. It could be a community forestry. It could be greater enforcement or land purchases, environmental education. Many things could come under that umbrella, but it's supposed to affect and to lead land stewards and local communities towards a greater effectiveness in protecting and restoring their natural environment, be it their own attitude or their ability to protect themselves against outside threats. So these things would lead to outcomes on biodiversity, and these could be either that you avoid some predicted loss in an area that is under ongoing degradation, or it could be a biodiversity uplift in absolute terms that you actually already are, for instance, in a degraded area that you are improving on over time. And those you can monitor. And you could also, in the end, in the last stage to the right, you could do a proper impact evaluation where you also take into account, what happens in other control areas where we do not have this type of intervention. To what extent can we really attribute any changes in biodiversity status to the proper intervention we're focusing on? So the question is, where do people in this theory of change, where do they take their point of departure to issue credits? So the third one that I've just mentioned is that it's the scientifically most advanced, where you would measure impact and you would say, okay, this biodiversity has been declining somewhat, but not as much as we could have predicted from the ongoing process in some control areas that we have in the same region of the same country. So you try for instance, to calculate a difference in difference type of scenario. But you could also simply look at outcomes, which is sort of a before-after assessment of the absolute trend that you are seeing. And I think both of these strategies would be defendable. But what we do see is that a lot of them stop currently at the stage one, where they take some actions and they are issuing credits on the incrementality of their actions, but not on any measured outcomes. So, as I was saying, carbon credits are kind of a bit of a role model in many ways, but the measurement part is, of course, much harder. Next, please. And that is because biodiversity, as you know, is multidimensional. And even at the dimension of species, for instance, you could have many different trends that are not necessarily parallel. Here I just showed sort of a forest ecology, a type of a stylized picture of how we see over the long term, over 300 years of a forest develop, and how the number of species would be expected to vary over time. And could you please press one more time? So for instance, here at one more time, please. So here in the interval 1, let's say you have a project here in that particular forest succession area. And actually, as you can see, as a sort of a baseline development, both animals, plants, and fungi species would be expanding. And that's great, because that's what you would like to see. But it could also be a different situation. If you press again, please. twice, yes. If you in another area, you could see that some species types are expanding while others are actually being diminished. Uh, uh, so if you have to be careful, what are you basing your credits on? What would be ecologically sound, but also commercially viable for your projects? Yeah, so some non-monotonous trends in biodiversity. And often you can see trends in biodiversity that differ across different types. So if we look at, I think it's also an issue of scale. If we look at what has happened, for instance, to forest biodiversity in Europe, I think there's not a lot of mapping out there, but generally forest biodiversity, in spite of the recent increase in biodiversity in forest area, is a substantial increase over the last decades. You have a decline. You still have a decline in biodiversity, in forest biodiversity. Not as much as in agricultural areas, but still a decline. But that is not necessarily well depicted in all of, as I'm showing here, in all of the dimensions of biodiversity. They show, again, different trends. And what we also see is with beginning impacts of climate change, species may migrate from one area to the other. So you may get actually some problematic trends that could show up in your biodiversity survey at a minor scale as an increase. You could also have in prolongation of that, you have on the one hand generalist or even invasive species, and on the other hand you have a sort of the higher quality type of rare or endemic species that should have a particular attention. And you may have some biodiversity that, as we call, is being called extinction depth, where the genetic erosion has been reaching a stage where you know that this population will not be viable in the long run, but this takes time. It's not something you will measure here and now. And also, if we look at the type of monitoring, often we monitor biodiversity in areas that are relatively undisturbed, and also we measure particularly iconic species that are of particular interest. So all of these things can create biases that kind of come to color our picture of biodiversity developments over time. Next, please. So yes, you could have a tendency at a continental scale of global loss, but still at some lower level scales, you could see a constant or even increasing biodiversity in spite of that. Yes. So in practice, these biodiversity credit schemes employ baskets of metrics between area and habitat, changes in the condition of that habitat, and also contribution to global goals, for instance, vis-a-vis the IUCN red list of species. If we look at the indicators that are being used, so you can see about half of them use species and ecosystems in combination. Some of them only use species, or some of them only ecosystems, or relatively few use the genetic level of biodiversity. And among the species, it's the birds and the mammals that are the most popular, unsurprisingly. So if we look at the type of monitoring, they are doing field-based surveys and remote sensing, but there are obviously a whole new range of technologies. which are still under exploration, but maybe in the near future we will be able to also use them to a greater extent and make it more cost effective to measure changes in biodiversity. Typically is an annual measurement, although other time periods exist also. So what about the whole money side of things? How big is the market going to be for these type of credits? Next, please. At the current stage, it's quite speculative, and there's been some widely cited consultancy reports or that take as a basis, some of the biodiversity funding gap assessments and say, this is what it will need to do. But that's not necessarily a good basis for assessing what it actually will be able to do. And I think a worrying part of it is that there are, for private buyers, there are the motivations they can be philanthropic or of a CSR type. They could be preparing for a future regulation that they want to front run, and sometimes even maybe delay a regulation through their voluntary action in an active way. So I think the worrying part is there enough motives? This biodiversity basically relates to public environmental services. It's a public concern. Can we expect the private sector to pick up this bill at a scale that will really make enough difference to the biodiversity funding gap that we are seeing? And then the actions that are being taken, to what extent are they additional? And that is a key concern for many of these schemes. Next, please. And as a sort of very basic thing, it obviously depends on you are doing some kind of action, a treatment, and what do you assume would have happened in the absence of that treatment? Would it have been a sort of a static level of biodiversity that you are trying to increase? Are you actually already in an improving trend that you are trying to accelerate? Or are you in the scenario of REDD+ and avoided deforestation, where you say, we know mostly for sure that here you will have a further degradation and loss of habitat and of species, and we're trying to mitigate that loss. 2 years ago now, we published an article in Science on carbon credits, and I think a lot of the lessons are potentially applicable to also to the emerging biodiversity credit markets. What we found is that we looked at a global sample of REDD+ projects, of avoided deforestation projects that are selling carbon credits. We looked at their intervention period is delineated with a vertical line, and to the right of that you have on the one hand what actually happened, on the other hand what we calculated from control areas would have likely happened without the intervention, given the pre-existing trends. And then you have the yellow curves that are kind of in hockey stick shape. Those are the assumptions that the project developers made about deforestation that would have happened without them, right? And they all go right up into the air, and so they're very pessimistic about what would have happened without them, and that of course helps them to sell all the area under that yellow curve as carbon credits. And this is what we have seen. So we found that on aggregate, 94% of the credits they are not really performing. They are not real. They are more an assumption, a sort of a mirage being created by an exaggeration of the risks that these areas would face. So how do the biodiversity credit schemes look at additionality until now? As I was trying to say before, some are outcome-based or use different indicators, but a lot of them are simply based on the actions, or they use their action to project some outcome from a modeling type of scenario. So you don't really see if they're selling something that they can't really prove. They have no indications to actually show the efficiency of their actions. So this is kind of a bit worrying, and it links also to the types of baselines they use. A lot of them are simply undescribed, where they leave it also open on what type of baselines they're going to use. Also, an important part in carbon has been on the equity and local benefit sides, where we've seen the carbon cowboy practices of people that are abusive of local populations in terms of not sharing any benefits and imposing a set of actions upon them. There, in terms, it seems that these new schemes, they have learned certain lessons, and you see a lot of minimum shares of participation of local people. So that's good news. Good. So I think biodiversity credits, we should see them as this nature commodification instrument with all the good and bad things that can entail. It's an interesting experiment to what extent you can make this operational. It can cover a lot of underground actions. There are some hyped expectations out there as to how big it can become. Nobody knows for sure, but I think we should not let us get carried away to see this as a panacea for biodiversity finance. Compared to carbon markets, we have some of the same issues, and some issues that are even more complex because of carbon. At least you have a single measure that is well defined and comparable across areas. For biodiversity, it's more complicated. But the additionalities issues are similar. And I think on the institutional side, I think we have to learn some of the lessons from carbon markets, so that we maybe avoid that it's a purely private sector thing, that the private sector buys and sells and also sets up all the rules, because then you often will see the nature benefits being left behind. So I'm out of time, but I'm just going to briefly show you the thing from the policy brief, just sort of the headlines. I think this tool, what it should do, it should be able to mobilize more biodiversity finance. It should not become a substitute for offsets, but it should be a new complementary tool. I think it's important to be ambitious in selecting sites and activities. What the carbon projects often they've gone in the middle of nowhere where there's no pressure, and then they made a project there and said, after 10 years, still nothing has happened. So we are to being congratulated for that and sell credit. So I think you have to take the bull by the horns and go to those places where there's actually a real threat and the real leverage. You need to adopt high integrity biodiversity standards. You need to use really performance-based crediting pathway, not just ones that are based simply on some activities being adopted. And there should be some realistic baselines also underlying these. So we do have from the carbon markets some good measures. We want high additionality. We want high permanence of these actions. Also after certain intervention has been lost, and we want to avoid or at least realistically assess leakage of threats into other areas. We that we also want these credits to act in a socially responsible way, so that local people are benefiting and if at all possible. And finally, maybe the architecture of these type of markets needs some external oversight, needs some environmental NGOs, in some cases maybe governments and other interest groups to participate in the monitoring of and the setting of the rules. And perhaps, and as a scientist, my last point is, well, you also need to actually go and do some serious assessment to what extent these things are working over time. You need to evaluate the impacts in a rigorous, in a scientifically rigorous way.